Welcome, Lenny.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
We're glad to have you here. As most of you know, Lenny is the Executive Director of the Martin County Historical Society, as well as our host of Our Story Out of the Past. And we have a very special show today. And Lenny, share with us a little bit about how this came about.
Well, you know, Jeff, I'm always looking for people of interest from the community to interview. And I happen to be thinking about one very famous person that came from our county, Walter Mondale.
Oh, sure.
And he's a Ceylon native. He was Attorney General, a Senator, Vice President. He even ran for President in 1984.
From Martin County.
From Martin County. And I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. I sent him an email and asked if he would consider an interview, being that he was a Martin County native. And the next day I got an email back saying he'd be glad to do it.
Wow. Did he give you any thing that he wanted to specifically talk about or not?
No, he really didn't. In my email, when I contacted him, I said I would like to visit with him about his growing up in small towns in Martin County and Faribault County. He graduated from Elmore. And he just said that would be great.
Well, how super. We're really excited to have this interview. And ladies and gentlemen, Lenny Tvedten and Walter Mondale.
Welcome to Our Story. This is Lenny Tvedten. Today I have the honor of speaking with former Vice President of the United States, Walter Mondale, who also happens to be a former Martin County resident, born in Ceylon and grew up in some small towns in southern Minnesota. And I think what we'll start with is Ceylon and your parents. What did they do, and what do you remember from Ceylon and Martin County in that area?
Yep. First, let me thank you for doing this. When I got the invitation to participate, I said, good, because, you know, I love those years, and as life goes on, it seems to kind of get remote from it. Sure. And I don't feel that way about it, so I'm glad. And I love our county historical societies because they really perform precious function. They keep us connected with our history, and so I'm delighted to do this. Well, I was born in 1928 in Ceylon, Minnesota. My dad was a minister in the local church there, and I think he had Ceylon, would be Sherburne, and one other. He had three places.
Three churches.
Yeah, that's what did. Gave 3 sermons every Sunday, if you can believe that. And my mom was a good musician, so she would run the choirs and teach piano and try to raise the boys. And I remember those early in my life, but I remember those years. We had a lot of good times, and I really have fond feelings about Ceylon. And they had a sign out front, the best little small town in America, or something. Is that still up there?
I'm not sure if it's still there or not, but it's in
put it back
the
up.
history book.
Yeah, it's good.
So,
yeah.
Busiest little town in America,
right.
or something.
Yeah,
like
right.
That. Sure. Well, from Ceylon, then you went to.
Well, Dad was a Methodist minister, and they had this policy of when they heard the same sermon the third time, they'd ask you to go somewhere else. And so we went from from Ceylon to Heron Lake. We were there about 5 years, I think, and then we went to Elmore, and we got there, I'm going to say 1938. So we were there before the war began, and then Dad and Mom came to Fairmont in like 1946, and she basically, Dad had a stroke. She worked at the Hamlin Methodist Church there.
Oh, okay.
Not Hamlin, Fairmont Methodist Church.
Methodist Church, sure. You know, I did take a look at your yearbook the year you graduated, and I saw that you were in a lot of activities.
Yep.
So, what can you tell us about some of those things? I mean, you played football.
Yeah.
I think you had a nickname, didn't you?
I did. They called me Crazy Legs.
Okay.
It was Crazy Head, but no, we like kids in those days. I always liked to put studies last and get the athletics, So and those small towns, one of the wonderful things, you could be in anything you wanted to.
Sure.
So I was football, basketball, track, debate, anything that came along, I would be in it.
Then after high school, you went on to college
Right.
at University of Minnesota?
Yeah. Well, I started at McAllister, and then went broke, and transferred to the university, which had, I think, something like $48 a quarter tuition, so I could afford that.
Okay.
And so I went there, and then went into got drafted. You got a picture of me here.
Sure,
That's
right
for
there.
the Martin County Selective Service Board did that
really?
for me.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was one of the most impressive acts of governmental efficiency I've ever seen. I wrote a note saying, I'd like to be drafted next month, because I had a plan in my bingo. I got,
You got it right
approval.
away.
Right, yeah. The board approved it immediately, so off I went.
Okay, well, yeah. You were in the Army?
Yeah.
And where were you at?
I was at almost all of it at Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Fort Knox.
Yeah, near the gold there.
Okay, sure. And you were in for how long?
2 years.
2 years.
That's what all the draftees got.
Okay. And then you went on to...
One of the reasons I wanted to get in a hurry, because I wanted to get the GI Bill so I could go to law school. So I came back to the University of Minnesota Law School then, the day after I got out of the Army, and so on.
And what did you major in college?
Whew. I hope they destroyed the records, but I think I'm going to say political science and history.
Okay. Speaking of political science, when did you first get your interest in politics, or when did that start, and how did it start? Was there a person that inspired you? Or?
Well, it was in the family. Dad was his idea of Christianity was that the faith required you to do good works on earth. That service was it wasn't a dead faith; it was an active faith. So all of us were encouraged to do something to help others. My older brother became a professor, and my younger brother Mort was active as a teacher, and then in the Minnesota Education Association and so on. So we all had that sort of tradition. And then my brother Pete, who went to high school in, I think, Fairmont. I don't know if he completed there, but he went there. He went to McAllister, and they had a young professor there named Hubert Humphrey. And so he said, "Boy, you gotta see this guy. He's hot." And so when I started McAllister, I connected with the mayor's office, and they had a campaign there. I got involved in that. And then when he ran for the U.S. Senate, I asked him if he'd come down to Martin County. They had a Farm Bureau picnic. It wasn't in Fairmont. It was just out of town. I forget where. And he agreed to come.
He did?
Yeah. So we had somewhere in Sentinel, there's got to be a picture of Hubert at that picnic. And of course, he had big success, big crowd.
Sure.
And I think it helped him a lot down in what is not known as Democratic territory.
No, it isn't. Did you work on his campaigns then as time went on?
You know, I was not on the inside, but I was, 19 then or something. And I asked, I went up to the headquarters. I said, I got to work for the Humphrey campaign. I got to do something. And so they said, well, we don't have any money, but if you could raise some money. And so I went down to Mankato, and I set up a Humphrey office there, and I got people to help me, and we had a good campaign. This would be 48.
48.
And so that's how I got started. We carried the district unbelievably. I don't think it's been carried by Democrats since Abraham Lincoln.
Then you had a private law practice for a while after you got out of college or after you got out of law school?
I went to Washington when Humphrey got elected. I went to Washington for a year with an outfit called Students for Democratic Action. Humphrey was the national chairman.
Was this volunteer work then?
No, I actually had a job that paid money, not much, but it was a different experience for me. So, and being in Washington, so it was exciting. And Humphrey, the new senator, that was exciting. And then I came home, and I'm just trying to get the time straight here. I may have gone back to McAllister, but I think I went over at the university about that time. And as that we talked about earlier, I finished my undergraduate work there, then went to law school.
Okay. And then you didn't go directly into politics right after law school. You worked for
you know, I was carrying two pails of water. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be in politics. I just had that in me. And so a guy named Harry McLaughlin, an old pal of mine, now gone, and I set up a little law practice, and I had once been with a firm called Larson, Levenger, Lindquist, and then Orville Freeman picked me as Attorney General in 1960. So I'd been out of law school about 3 years. I really wasn't qualified, but
looks like it worked though.
I took the job anyway and gave it a try. See, so but that was wonderful. Those are wonderful years for me, because you have all that juice, you know, and you're going to make it work. That was an exciting thing for me, and I came down to Fairmount a couple of times during that campaign.
So you were Attorney General for how many years?
From May of 1960 to about the last day of 64. And then I went to the Senate.
And then you went to the Senate. And how long was that?
I was in the Senate from then until I was elected vice president and took office in January of 1976. So about 12 or 14 years. And then, of course, as vice president, you're presiding officer, president of the Senate. So in a sense, I was both vice president and involved in the Senate. I wasn't a senator, though.
Welcome back, and let's join Lenny as he interviews Walter Mondale about living in southern Minnesota.
You were instrumental in making some changes in the vice president's office.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, it was a big change, it turns out. Carter and I talked about this before we got together, and I told him, I said, you know, I really like the Senate, and I bet I could do more good for you there than I can as vice president, I'm not interested in a ceremonial office. I had, don't forget, Humphrey had been vice president.
Right.
And I went to, and it wasn't a happy thing always for Hubert. So I went to see him, and I said, what do you recommend? You know this stuff. He said, I think you should do it if you're asked. He said, because it'll broaden you. You learn more about the country and the world. And he said, you can do more in 2 days in the White House than you can here in 2 years. So I took his advice, and I talked to Carter about making it a meaningful office. I said, and Carter said, I've thought about this. I think you should be in the White House, not like the others were, standby equipment.
So they actually, prior to that, they weren't even in the White House?
No. They were over, they had a fancy office over in the executive office building, but they had nothing to do. Beautiful furniture, but that's awful quiet during the day. Rockefeller told me the thing that bothered him about being vice president is that the phone never rang, and it was people ridiculed it, but it was a big waste of time, and so
kind of a figurehead type of position.
Yeah, and you know, 1 second you might be the president, right. So it wasn't good government either. So Carter did what we now call executivize the vice president, brought him into the White House, made him part of the president's duties. I saw the same information, secret and otherwise, that he did. I talked to the same advisors. I was invited to every meeting in the Oval Office. I could decide not to go, but he told me, every meeting I have, you're invited to. And nothing like that had ever happened before. And I think most people felt good about that change. And and I was able to, and I think so. Since then, every presidential, vice presidential structure has been patterned on what Carter and I did.
Okay. You still keep in contact with Jimmy Carter?
Oh, yes. That's another first. Usually, president and vice president don't talk to each other again. We do.
There are some that don't get along too well, I understand.
No.
So, okay.
They say a vice president every day reminds his president of his mortality.
Well, thinking of your career in politics at all these different levels, you're from small town Minnesota, small town America. Has that influenced you in many ways, or how has that influenced you?
Well, I think it had a lot to do with how I think and what I believe, and my values, and I think what we'd call common sense that you learn, it's always been a part of me. And for example, when I went down to meet with Carter in the small town of Plains, he said, "What do you think of Plains?" I said, "It's pretty big." I told him about Ceylon. Elman, I think the fact we're both small town kids,
right,
came up with a religious background, a little different, but we understood each other. There was something about that made it comfortable, and we stuck together for 4 tough years.
Yeah.
So that had a big effect on me.
In which position do you think you were able to accomplish the most?
Well, I loved them all. I loved being Attorney General, and I think we changed that office from what had been kind of a passive legal opinion office into what I call public protection. And that has changed. Since then, most attorneys generals have seen that as part of their job, and I think that's good. The Senate, I was involved in a lot of issues. We'll go through them today. I felt like I was getting to know the Senate, the rules, the senators, and I was learning how to get tough things done. And that's not easy with 100 egos walking around there.
Right.
And
fairly large egos too.
Oh yeah, some historically large. So you got to do that. And so I love the Senate. And then the changes we made that we discussed in the vice presidency, I think, have really made a big difference in American government.
Right. Yeah, they're still patterning that.
Yep.
Who is in your career? Who is the most interesting, or maybe one of the most interesting people you've met?
Let me not say the most, but Hubert, of course, was I'd say almost like a father to me, and brilliant. One of the probably, if you were forced to say who is the biggest and most powerful, influential Minnesota politician in our history, I think almost everybody would say Hubert Humphrey. Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give somebody who is interested, a young person that's interested in going into politics?
I give that speech you just gave, and I hope some of you will think about going into politics. And I know what you're thinking. Well, I don't have any money. I don't have a name. Nobody knows me. All this stuff goes to the big shots. I said, well, that wasn't true in my life. I said, I grew up. We never had a dime. Nobody knew my name. But I believed in things, and I went in. First thing you know,
sure.
I said that can happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to encourage young people. I'm not talking about politics. What kind of politics? But to try to get involved and make the world and the country
place.
Better. Yep.
Okay. Well, I bet you've had a lot of interviews over your career.
Yeah.
What are some?
This is one of the better ones.
I was just going to say, what's one of the better ones you've had, with the exception of this one?
Yeah.
Or some of the more interesting ones, or just anything about any that you can think back at.
Well, when I was running for president, the interviews could really be rough. You get into you see it now
sure.
in a campaign.
Yeah.
Once you get down into the clutches of a primary with some strong opponents, and rocks are being thrown all over. The press gets into the middle of that and tries to make something out of it, which a good journalist should do, and those are sometimes long interviews for me. This is very pleasant.
Good, appreciate it. Well, we really appreciate your doing this, Mr. Mondale. It's great to have this as a record of somebody who did come from Martin County. And this, as I had said before, we'll have it on file at the Martin County Historical Society, and it will be on our story.
Thank you. We had these pictures.
Yes.
That I was going to talk about. I don't want you to think I went and made pictures of myself, because I didn't. These were part of an assemblage of pictures put together by the U.S. Senate historian for a leadership conference that I participated in.
Okay, which one is you here now?
Two of them are from Martin County. This is when I was drafted. That's you could see why the Koreans were afraid of us. and this is me and my brother Pete.
Okay.
And
you're on the right?
I'm the little guy there.
Okay.
Pete's older. Yeah. Right there somewhere in Ceylon.
It's in Ceylon. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, good. Well, thank you very much. Any closing comments or anything?
I thank you for this. I really enjoy it.
Okay, well, thank you.
This is Walter Mondale for Our Story, Minnesota.